patterns and things like that. And we've just looked at a piece of skin that's, you know, quote unquote, alive. Now, you can take a piece of rock, which is considered to be dead or inorganic material, and you put it underneath the same electron microscope, and you go deeper and deeper and deeper at its core, and guess what? You can't tell the difference. It is exactly the same. So our fabric of our entire universe is identical. And what's even more interesting is the deeper you go into looking at, for example, tissue underneath an electron microscope, and you hold that picture next to a picture of, let's say, some type of a galaxy, they look the same. It's as if we are all our own universes. I mean, it's truly wild. And that to me, that idea, that defines God. It's nothing really personal, a personal God, I don't think so. But definitely that we all belong to this incredible fabric, this force of creation, or whatever you want to call it. So the whole idea, I mean, it just it transcends everything. And therefore, you know, the idea is that the ancient alien theory just makes the whole concept of God even bigger than we can already think, because that means we're not the only ones, and that this universe is teeming with life, and that to me is the magnificence of creation. And not, I mean, think about it, because in this day and age, we truly think that we are the pinnacle of creation. And I totally disagree with the statement, of course, that we are the crown of creation. Nothing's been created that's ever been better than us, and yada, yada, yada. Well, if I were, you know, or as a God-fearing man, and not God in a personal sense with, you know, fire and brimstone nonsense, then that to me would be an insult in the face of creation, because it means that we couldn't, or God couldn't do any better. And of course, I'm not talking about this room, but look at all the rest of us. We are such an idiotic society, it's not even funny. And with all the social networks and the social platforms, our own ignorance is being, you know, let's roll out a banner or a red carpet for our stupidity.
Right on.
I mean, it's truly amazing. So anyway, going back to ancient India, or we haven't even been there yet, but we are going to ancient India right now. Ancient India is a complete treasure trove regarding the ancient alien theory, because in ancient India, their entire history is based upon the idea that their civilization was, in fact, jump-started by extraterrestrials who descended from the sky and taught these human beings in all sorts of different scientific disciplines. And all over India, we have these bizarre paintings and carvings of flying palaces and houses in the sky. And if anyone has read any of the holy books of ancient India, like the Mahabharata or any of the Vedas, they read like Star Wars. Giant aerial battles that took place in the air with fire raining from the sky and people dying. I mean, horrible, horrible stuff. Very similar to Star Wars. And, you know, in India, I couldn't hold a speech like this, because to them it'd be like, okay, what else? You know, okay, we know. Go. See, to them it's like, all right, what else? So India is definitely a treasure trove for finding ancient alien references, flying shields and things like that. Or, you know, in India they had these stories about what's called the Vimanas. And Vimanas were the vehicles that actually, because according to the ancient Indian texts, especially in the Vedas, and none of the quotes that I'm about to give you were invented. I mean, you can go and read those in any of the ancient texts, and I would like to, and I'm going to get back to this later, but whenever you do research about this stuff, I want you to look at the oldest of source materials, because only the oldest of source materials is closer to what actually happened than, you know, if you read something from 2 years ago. Because we are all so smart today. And when we read a text from the 1600s or something like this, and it says something very clear, that's something descended from the sky, and then this scientist comes along and says, well, obviously this is a mistranslation. So what they meant is that they were drunk, and while they were smoking a doobie, this all happened in their heads. And that is what science has become today. That, you know, we think that we have all the answers today, when in fact we have none of the answers. And so in the ancient Indian texts, there are these stories of these 3 giant cities that used to orbit the earth. One was made of gold, one was made of silver, and one was made of iron. And from these cities, that's where the quote-unquote gods, by the way, again, gods lowercase g. There never were any real gods. Our ancestors thought that they were gods because they didn't understand the technology behind those visits. And by the way, Arthur C. Clarke did say it best. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So whenever you hear old stories about something happening with magic, look at that story again and think, could it be misunderstood technology? And the answer is yes, of course. So from these orbiting space cities, in order to reach Earth, those inhabitants, they used what's called a vimana. And vimanas were these flying machines, or chariots of the gods, that were used as shuttlecraft between orbiting stations and Earth. And we have very concise descriptions in a book, for example, called the Vimanika Shastra, which debunkers will say is null and void because it was only written in the 17th century, and while that is correct, nobody tells you that the texts themselves were written 2,000 years ago, and only in the 17th century somebody actually took the time to compile them all into one book. So, you know, right there, the argument is null and void, because just because somebody finally took the time to do this doesn't mean that those 2,000-year-old texts are wrong. So we have these stories of these vimanas that were extremely technologically advanced, and they describe exactly what they were made of, what some of their propulsion systems were, that you had to wear specific suits in order to pilot them, and that they could be in 2 places at once, that they had cloaking devices, how they could be made invisible, that they had incredible weaponry with which they had these aerial battles that I was referring to earlier. And at some point, all these cities came together in the firmament, and this giant battle took place, and 2 of these cities were destroyed, and it was clearly described how these cities exploded and all the debris came falling down in a storm of fire. Very vivid descriptions. And so I would urge anyone to go read some of those ancient texts, because it's unbelievable. And by the way, the word viman, still today, in the Hindi language, means airplane. So what we have here is living mythology, where the meaning of the word has never changed. Yet I'm told, oh, that's just coincidence. Screw coincidence. Because after a while, even coincidence no longer makes sense. So all around the world, here we have a painting from ancient China, chariots up in the sky. This is from South America. Again, some type of a city or a house or a palace in the clouds. Again, I would like to reiterate, our ancestors were as intellectually astute as we are today. See, I'm not the one who's insulting our ancestors. It is the scientists, quote unquote, who are saying that this was just a way for our ancestors to understand stuff because they couldn't cope with nature. They were a people of nature. How could they not cope with nature? It's totally preposterous to suggest that, you know, thunder frightened them. Well, are you kidding me? Come on. And when, as we can read in most of these ancient texts, when all of a sudden the quote-unquote heavens opened and these very human-looking people descended and taught us in different disciplines and gave us specific instructions, and I'm told by professors that, oh, no, this didn't really happen. It only happened in our ancestors' heads, and it was a coping mechanism, then those professors are the ones who are insulting our ancestors, not me. Because nature does not give instructions. Never has, never will. And don't think twice about it. That even if we're drunk or hopped up on whatever, we'll know if something actually happens or it goes on in our heads. We know that. And one thing that, you know, I have the privilege of working with a whole bunch of psychiatrists and psychologists, because I've always been, the one big argument was always, well, you know, all of these stories and pictures and carvings I'm about to show you are all a figment of our ancestors' imagination, just like I said, in order for them to cope with their environment. Which means that, you know, it's a thought that had to originate somewhere, and because I have colleagues in medicine, I asked them, I said, you know, is it possible for any, because the argument is that, you know, in this day and age, you know, I'm always told that, for example, stuff like this, these were just the comic strips of those days. And that would mean that we could apply the concept of comic books to that time period. Now, we would all have to agree that that's a weird argument. So then I asked, well, is it even possible for any of us to come up with concepts or ideas of that, let's say, 10,000 years ago? And the answer of every single psychologist that I've talked to is no. That every idea has a point of inception, of creation. That nothing can start from out of nothing. There had to have been a spark of inspiration, something that gave flight to an eventual story. And of course I'm aware that stories over time become embellished with stuff that never happened, but I don't care about that. What I care about is the origin, the actual core of what happened at the beginning. And all around the world, those stories are not similar. They're identical. Meaning that something happened where someone descended from the sky and kickstarted mankind's evolution, or cultural evolution. And so we have, you know, all around the world these carvings and, you know, weird tackle boxes that have been, or lunch boxes that they're carrying around, that remind me of, for example, one of those big flashlights. Now, why on earth would they put a face on a flashlight, for example, providing this was a flashlight? I don't know. Well, in order, because the same like the islanders were saying that this is a plane, and there's not a plane, but it was a angry bird made of metal, they would say that something like this, for example, could be the bringer of light. You push the button and then the light goes on and the flashlight works. To them, they didn't understand the technology behind, you know, this device. And they can be found all around the world. I mean, this here, for example, is in Yugoslavia, in a monastery, and it clearly depicts some dude sitting inside what looks like to be a shooting star. Now, was it really a shooting star? No. Misunderstood technology. Here we have in the La Venta Park in Mexico, where the Olmecs used to live, we have this stele of a snake with a guy sitting inside with a helmet. Again, holding on to some kind of a box. And of course, archaeology says that, he's sitting inside the belly of Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan. And for those of you who are not familiar, it's the same. Those are the same names. These are names for the same deity, the main deity of Central and South America. And Quetzalcoatl was always depicted as a flying snake, or a winged serpent. Now, to repeat, our ancestors were a people of nature, or a nature people. Why on earth would they all of a sudden carve all these things and have their mythologies filled with stories of winged or plumed serpents, giant serpents, screaming serpents, snakes, descending from the sky? Why? What if they saw some type of craft? And again, their frame of reference, technological frame of reference, was way lower than ours. They didn't have the vocabulary for aircraft. They didn't have the vocabulary for space travel and things like that. So of course, they would describe or carve it in a way that made sense to them. And if you look tomorrow, when you look up in the sky and you see a plane, a passenger jet flying by, and it leaves behind a contrail, I want you to look back up 5 minutes later. And that contrail, all of a sudden, won't be straight anymore, but depending on the wind conditions, it'll be a wiggly, it snakes across the sky. And let's say the wind conditions are really strong, and it happens almost immediately. If you have that plane, that silver tip, at the beginning of that long contrail, if you don't have the vocabulary to describe that, it's a snake in the sky. And so, any argument against that, in my opinion, is like, you can look at it any way you want, but all of this, what I'm talking about today, or tonight, see, one of the other arguments that I'm always hurled at is Occam's razor. And Occam's razor suggests, by definition, that with any theory, in the end, the most simplest of answers is the correct one. And I'm told left and right, up and down, down and up, that the ancient alien theory does not satisfy Occam's razor. And I'm mystified, because the ancient alien theory is the simplest solution to many questions. Not all of them, because I'm not saying it was all aliens. But we will explore this whole Occam's razor theory later, when I will show you stuff that we today would have incredible difficulty recreating. I'm not saying, and I've never said, that we can't do it, but we would be incredibly hard-pressed to do so. And then you have these statues that, looked at from a very childlike perspective. They truly look as if they're wearing some type of a spacesuit. And then I'm asked, well, if extraterrestrials are so incredibly advanced, why on earth would they be wearing similar spacesuits as we are wearing today? That's a preposterous argument. And I'm like, are you listening to yourself? Are you listening to yourself? Did we go to the moon naked? And what, extraterrestrials are supposed to run around naked too? And yes, I'm aware of all the stories of the greys that show up in your bedroom naked without genitals and things like that. But you know, to me, all that is nonsense. And people know this. I mean, I appreciate the modern UFO field, but there are so many idiots in that field, it's not even funny. And so, you know, the whole idea that, or the whole argument that extraterrestrials would never wear spacesuits is preposterous, because of course they would have to wear something, because as we all know from the movies, our bacteria are harmful to extraterrestrials. Now, that of course, you know, it's funny to listen to, but the argument can be made that our bacteria could be harmful to another civilization or another species that comes here. So it's normal for anyone to wear a suit. I mean, we do it today. I mean, when the Apollo astronauts came back, they were put in quarantine for 4 days. So this is not something that, you know, I pulled out of thin air. And so all around the world, this is in Copan, Honduras, you see these very bizarre statues and carvings of what to me looks very technical in nature. And I'm aware that the professors are suggesting that this guy is wearing a headdress made out of feathers. But let me tell you that right next, and we'll see this later, right next to here, there is a statue of a guy actually wearing a headdress made of feathers. This doesn't look like it. And so therein lies the difference, and I will show you these comparisons in a few minutes. And of course, they're always, you know, manipulating some controls on some chest devices or packs on their chests. And here, this is, for example, in the Brazilian rainforest. These are the Kayapo Indians who have this myth about this guy that descended from the sky, Bebkor Roti, who founded their first school. And each year, they have a festival, and they celebrate his arrival, that he taught them in agriculture and in astronomy that was only discovered, or astronomical facts that were only discovered and corroborated in the 1960s. Very similar to the Dogon tribe in Africa, who knew about Sirius A and Sirius B and it having an invisible companion star hundreds of years before it was actually discovered by our wise astronomers. And you know, you make the comparison like this, in my opinion, very compelling, again, with the whole idea of it being a suit. Or you see something like this, the the Dogu statues of ancient Japan, who, according to the ancient Japanese tradition, started the Japanese culture. From where? From up there. They're very clear about that. Now, and so you have, you know, and they found many, many of these statues. Here we are in Guatemala, and we found something like this, where you have obviously something that looks like a turtle. And I'm not denying that. But look at the very weird aerodynamic shape, and it's glaringly obvious that one thing is sorely missing. The design of the shell design. By the way, when I struggle sometimes speaking to you and I'm looking for words, it's because English is not my first language, and so there's like 5 other languages floating around in there, so bear with me. But, you know, so you have this very bizarre carving here, and this is, by the way, it's not an original. This is when archaeologists find artifacts. The original is made of clay. When archaeologists find some valuable artifacts, what they'll do immediately is they either put it in plaster to make a copy of it, or they carve it in wood, just in case the original gets destroyed. And so now this is a copy of an original, and when I asked, what is this about? They said, well, this is a representation of the giant flying turtles that once flew around here in Guatemala by the gods. And they said this, the archaeologists said that, without a flinching of an eye. Now, of course, to them, it's all fun and games, flying turtles, whatever. To me, it's like, are you serious? That's sensational. Because, look at the weird goggles, the helmet that this thing is wearing, which is the turtle's head, obviously. But there's obviously a person sitting or inside of this quote-unquote helmet. So my question is, what did they see back then? So this guy right here is the Rocket Man, as I call him, and he can be found also in the Veracruz region of Mexico. And if anyone will do a road trip in the next few weeks down to New York City, you can go check this guy out. He's at the Museum of Natural History, and according to the little plaque that is underneath this guy, it says, God of Textiles. Found in Veracruz, 500 AD or something like this. Nothing else is further known. I'm like, okay, I respect that. What I don't respect is the God of Textiles. Wait, but what are you talking about? What does that mean? See, right there, that is an insult to our ancestors' comprehension of things, to suggest that they went through all this trouble to create something like this because, oh, in their crazy mind, they had to have a statue for the God of Textiles. Are you kidding me? I mean, what is that? So if we look at this, then we can clearly see some type of a control pack that he has on his chest with tubes coming out. We've got the 6 wings. His body is obviously in some type of a pressure suit or an astronaut suit or something like that. And above everything, look at the top. I mean, his head, that's not hair. It's a skull cap, similar to what our astronauts have to wear when they take off into outer space. And the biggest elephant in the room is that obviously this guy is black. Just like all the other Olmec heads that we find in Mexico. They all have black features. What do the professors say? Oh, the Olmecs. They must have been the beauty ideal of the current culture in that region. There's no way that they ever knew that Africans existed at that time. Now I ask you, who is insulting whom here? It is obvious that those two cultures interacted. Glaringly obvious. Mm-hmm. And it could even be argued that the reason why these Olmec heads, giant Olmec heads, they're taller than the tallest person here could not be above or could not reach higher than an Olmec head. They're giant. I mean gigantic. That Africans taught that culture something, and in order to worship them, those cultures then create these Olmec heads. But what I've just said is absolutely preposterous in the eye of professors. And they call what they do science. I'm just throwing it out there. Now, moving on. Talking about misunderstood technology, and because we were in that region of the world, this right here is Tikal, Guatemala. And right here, we have an incredible stele that I'm about to show you. And by the way, tomorrow, happy Star Wars Day. And number 2, at the end of episode 4, which for me will always be episode 1, screw the rest of the movies.
Yeah.
Well, the original trilogy, and then screw the rest. But if you remember, at the very end of the original Star Wars movie, the fighter jets or the X-wing fighters coming out of the Rebel base, that was filmed in Tikal. Mm-hmm. So if you ever wonder where that was with those towers and stuff, that's right there. And so we have a stele here that we'll look in a second, but before we go there, I would like you to briefly look at this statue, and we'll get back to the statue also in a few minutes. But what we have here is a statue of Ganesh. Now we were just in India, we're coming back to India real quick, because Ganesh today is always depicted as this fat elephant, big ears and a trunk. You know, Ganesh, the god of wealth and prosperity. But what nobody even remotely thinks about is, where did this Ganesh character come from? Well, what's his origin? What was his evolution? And well, here we're looking at one of the earliest bronze statues ever made of Ganesh. Now, even anyone with a half a brain that looks at this, I ask you, does that look like an actual elephant? And the answer is no. But it has features of an elephant to someone who doesn't really know what they're looking at, because what we're looking at here is he's wearing a very bizarre, first of all has a very bizarre face, and then he has more than just 2 arms. In fact, he has 4 arms, and he's holding axes that could be misinterpreted, holding them up like this, as big ears, elephant ears. And of course, the telltale sign of this being misinterpreted as an elephant, this trunk right here. But does it look like an elephant's trunk, or does it look like a breathing apparatus? And I will not answer that question. And anyone who suggests or says, oh, well, but that's just one statue, it's coincidence. Well, no, there's another one right here. But this statue, this one is in Paris, by the way, the other one was in India. Here you can already see the evolution of Ganesh, the transformation of him being turned into an elephant. But he still has that canister that he's holding in his hands, right here and over here. But already he is being transformed into something Ganesh never was. And so